The Kansas City Alias, The Mystery of Room 1046, and Artemus Ogletree. Welcome back to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, J. Nickel Investigations, and today we're stepping outside of Ontario, across the border, and back in time to one of the most perplexing and haunting mysteries in American criminal history. It's a story so bizarre, so full of unanswered questions, that has captivated amateur sleuths and professional investigators for nearly 90 years. We're talking about the murder of a man known only as Roland T. Owen, found in room 1046 of the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri, back in 1935. Our story begins on a cold Wednesday afternoon, January 2nd, 1935. At precisely 1:20 p.m., a man walked into the grand lobby of the Hotel President in downtown Kansas City. This was a busy, bustling place, a hub of activity in a city that, at the time, was known for its wide open and often corrupt atmosphere. The man, who appeared to be in his late teens or early 20s, signed the register as Roland T. Owen, Los Angeles. What struck the clerk as odd was his apparent lack of luggage. He carried only a small bag containing little more than a comb, a hairbrush, and a tube of toothpaste tucked into the pocket of his overcoat. He made a peculiar request for an interior room on a high floor, away from the street. He was given room 1046. A seemingly minor detail, the desire for discretion, would later become a critical piece of the puzzle. Strange interactions. For the next 2 days, the staff at the Hotel President would encounter Roland T. Owen in a series of increasingly strange and unsettling interactions. The first was Mary Soptio, the hotel maid. On January 3rd, she went to clean room 1046. When she knocked, Owen answered and asked her to leave the door unlocked, telling her, "I'm expecting a friend." When she returned later that afternoon, the room was dark. Owen was sitting on his bed, fully dressed in the gloom. Mary also noticed a small handwritten note on the desk. It read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." She found this odd, but didn't think much of it until she left the room, and to her surprise, found the door being locked from the outside. She found this profoundly disturbing, later telling police it made her feel as if the guest was being held prisoner. That same day, Soptio recalled Owen receiving a phone call. She overheard him speak to someone he called Dawn, saying, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast." Later that evening, the strangeness escalated. Mary Soptio and another guest on the 10th floor reported hearing two men arguing loudly inside room 1046. Even more chilling, some hours later, there was a lot of noise, which sounded like male and female voices, talking loud and cursing. A bellhop even recalled seeing a commercial woman, a known sex worker, visiting that room during this time. The next morning, January 4th, the phone in room 1046 became a central character in this unfolding mystery. The hotel switchboard operator repeatedly noticed it was off the hook. Around 7 o'clock a.m., a bellboy named Randolph Probst was dispatched to check on the room. He knocked, and a man with a deep, gruff voice told him to come in, turn on the lights. When Probst explained the door was locked, the voice simply refused to open it. An hour and a half later, at 8:30 a.m., the phone was still off the hook. Another bellboy, Harold Pike, was sent. This time, Pike used a master key to enter the room. He found it dark. On the bed, Roland T. Owen lay naked, breathing heavily. Pike also noticed a large, dark stain on the bedsheets. Assuming the man was simply drunk, Pike hung up the phone, which had been knocked over, and left the room, locking it behind him. But the phone went off the hook again, and this time it led to the horrifying discovery. The crime scene. Around 11 o'clock a.m. on January 4th, Randolph Props, the first bellboy, returned to room 1046. Using his master key, he entered the darkened room. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Roland T. Owen was not drunk. He was kneeling on his hands and elbows about 2 feet from the door, his head clutched in his hands. He was surrounded by a pool of blood. Props immediately called the police. When police and a doctor, Dr. Flanders, arrived, the scene was horrific. Owen was barely conscious. He'd been bound and restrained with a cord, later identified as a clothesline, tied tightly around his neck, ankles, and wrists. His body was a tapestry of abuse. He'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest above the heart, with one wound puncturing a lung. His skull was fractured by at least 3 blows to the head, and his body showed extensive bruising, consistent with a severe beating and torture. Dr. Flanders asked the dying man, "Who did this to you?" Owen, in a whisper, uttered a single chilling word: "Nobody." He then claimed he'd simply fallen and hit his head in the bathtub. He soon lapsed into a coma. He died hours later, shortly after midnight on January 5th, 1935, at General Hospital. The crime scene itself held more mysteries. All of Owen's clothing and personal belongings were gone, including the coat and brush he'd checked in with. The room had been wiped down, seemingly to remove fingerprints. Yet a few perplexing items were left behind. A label torn from a cheap necktie, a hairpin, an unsmoked cigarette, and a piece of broken glass in the sink. A glass bearing women's fingerprints on the telephone, a safety pin, and most curiously, a full bottle of diluted sulfuric acid. The investigation. The Kansas City Police Department launched a massive investigation. With no identification, the victim was simply Roland T. Owen. Detectives painstakingly interviewed hotel staff, guests, and anyone who might have seen something. The maid's account of the door being locked from the outside, the gruff voice, the argument, the missing belongings, and the unusual items left behind all pointed to a highly complex and calculated crime. The presence of the diluted sulfuric acid was particularly baffling. Was it a planned torture implement that was never used? Was it meant to destroy evidence? Or did it belong to the killer for an entirely different, unknown purpose? Its significance remains one of the many unanswered questions. Police tried desperately to identify the victim. His body was displayed at a local funeral home for weeks, with thousands of curious onlookers passing through, but no one recognized him. A nationwide search began, focusing on his unique physical characteristics: a pronounced cauliflower ear, and most importantly, a large, hairless, hexagon-shaped scar on the side of his head. Then came another bizarre twist. Just as police were preparing to bury Roland T. Owen in a potter's field, an anonymous mail caller contacted them. This individual paid for Owen to have a private burial plot in Memorial Park. The caller allegedly told police that Owen hadn't played the game fair, and cheaters usually get what's coming to them. This comment immediately suggested a motive of revenge or betrayal. At the funeral itself, an even stranger occurrence. 13 American Beauty roses arrived, along with a card that simply read, "Love forever, Louise." The identity is revealed. The case of Roland T. Owen remained cold for nearly 2 years, but the real breakthrough, and perhaps the cruelest twist, came in November 1936. A newspaper article featuring a photo of the unidentified man and highlighting his distinctive scar was published nationwide. In Birmingham, Alabama, a woman named Ruby Ogletree saw that photo. Her heart stopped. The scar, a grease burn from her son's infancy, was unmistakable. The man found dead in room 1046 was her son, Artemus Ogletree, a 19-year-old. Ruby then revealed an even more heartbreaking detail. For months after his death, she'd been receiving typewritten letters, seemingly from Artemus. The letters claimed he was alive, traveling to New York, then sailing for France, and recovering from an unspecified illness. But Ruby found the details odd and the slang used unfamiliar. Crucially, her son did not know how to type. These letters were a deliberate and cruel deception, clearly orchestrated by the killer or an accomplice, to mislead the police and prevent a missing person investigation. In August 1935, Ruby also received a phone call from a man identifying himself as Godfrey Jordan, who claimed Artemus was alive and well, recovering after saving Jordan from thugs in Cairo, Egypt. Theories. With Artemus Ogletree identified, the investigation gained new direction, but no clear answers. The theories began to coalesce. Number 1. Homosexual encounter gone wrong or blackmail. This is the most prevalent theory. Ogletree's use of an alias, his request for a discreet interior room, his refusal to name his attacker, and a note to Dawn all point to a secret life. In the 1930s, homosexuality was illegal and dangerous. Police focused on a man named Joseph Ogden, who used the alias Donald Kelso and was implicated in another gruesome murder in New York in 1937. Ogden was known to have a history of homosexuality, leading detectives to believe he was the Don mentioned. However, the FBI later cleared him in 1950 after determining his handwriting did not match his signature on the hotel registration card. Number 2. Revenge or relationship betrayal. The anonymous caller's remark about cheaters and the Love Forever Louise card strongly suggest a motive rooted in a jealous or betrayed lover. The woman's fingerprints on the glass and reports of a woman's voice arguing in the room lend credence to this theory. Louise could have been the killer, an accomplice, or someone deeply connected to the tragedy. Robbery and concealment. The meticulous removal of all of Ogletree's belongings and sophisticated deception of the typewritten letters suggest a calculated effort to erase his identity and misdirect authorities. However, the extreme violence and torture involved seem to go beyond simple robbery, hinting at a more personal, rage-fueled motive. Ruby Ogletree herself had a strong suspicion. Her son's traveling companion, a man named Joe Simpson. She confronted him years later. Simpson, she claimed, denied involvement but cryptically boasted that the case was the perfect crime. He became nervous when she pressed him about the Godfrey Jordan phone call. Simpson also promised to deliver a typed letter from Artemus, who again didn't type, but never showed up. The case goes cold. The Kansas City Police Department officially kept the Roland T. Owen / Artemus Ogletree file open for nearly 15 years, until December 1950. Despite the detailed initial investigation, the national search, the identification of the victim, and the strange leads that emerged, no one was ever arrested, and the murder weapon was never found. The Room 1046 mystery remains one of the most compelling and frustrating cold cases in history. Was it a secret lover, a jealous partner, a professional blackmailer, or a random encounter gone terribly wrong? Who was Dawn? Who was Louise? And what role did that unsettling bottle of diluted sulfuric acid play? We may never know the full truth of what happened to Artemus Ogletree in Room 1046. All that remains is a chilling tale of a young man, a hidden life, and a hotel room that held a horrifying secret. forever echoing through the halls of unsolved crime. Thank you for joining me on Ontario Cold Cases, and please tune in to part 2 of this story, coming tomorrow, in which I detail a number of pieces of information I found when going through the police files in this case. Perhaps you can help solve this mysterious case. Because every case deserves answers, and every victim deserves justice. Subscribe now to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. Episodes available wherever you get your podcasts.